Hey everyone, before we dive into today's episode, I want to tell you about something new we are launching on Talking Fed's Substack. With the constant flood of executive orders and political turmoil, one question keeps coming up. Is this actually legal? That's exactly what we will be tackling in Is It Legal?, a new Substack Live series from Talking Feds. Every Wednesday at noon Eastern Time, I'll go live with top legal and political experts or just on my own to break down the biggest legal issues in real time, what the law says, what precedent tells us, what we think will actually happen, and what it all means. Join us at Talking Fed Substack starting this Wednesday. And just one more announcement about our next event in Talking San Diego that you won't want to miss. On Friday, March 21st, we'll be welcoming the one and only Maureen Dowd, Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times columnist, for a conversation anchored in her new book, Notorious. For tickets and more information on all Talking San Diego events, visit talkingsandiego.net. Welcome to Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent former federal officials and special guests for a dynamic discussion of the most important political and legal topics of the day. I'm Harry Litman. Donald Trump continued to wage war on the government he's ostensibly leading, but at week's end it looked as if he or his DOJ loyal servants might have overplayed their hands. Trump notched 2 more wins in his cabinet confirmation spree as Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. squeaked through thanks to his relentless hardball tactics with individual senators. That left only the ultra-controversial Kash Patel hanging in the balance. But Trump took it on the chin in multiple federal district courts, which issued orders blocking him from plowing ahead with a slew of lawless measures, many of which outright disregarded Congress's constitutional authority to create federal agencies and control the purse strings. By week's end, the Young administration had its first bona fide scandal, though whether the American public would take notice remained an open question. Making it clear he was executing Trump's will, Acting Deputy Attorney General and previous Trump defense attorney Emile Beauvais tried to strong-arm the acting United States Attorney in Manhattan into dropping charges against New York Mayor Eric Adams. But she refused, resigning rather than carrying out what she saw as an improper and unlawful order, and that set off a cascade of resignations, both in her office and at Maine Justice. Beauvais temporarily staunched the bleeding with a ruthless power play, locking all DOJ public integrity officials in a room and forcing them to pick someone to dismiss the case. Even setting aside the sheer brutality of the move, the scandal is now poised to play out before a federal judge who must decide whether to accept the dismissal. To work through a week in which Trump's raw political will secured narrow victories for dubious nominees and led the administration into a burgeoning scandal at the Department of Justice, we welcome 3 of the best and most seasoned commentators in the country. And they are Norm Ornstein. Norm is a political scientist and co-host of the podcast Words Matter. He is also a prolific author, and he co-wrote the bestseller, One Nation After Trump, a guide for the perplexed, the disillusioned, the desperate, and the not yet deported. Thanks so much for joining, Norm Ornstein.
Always, Harry.
Alisyn Camerota, an award-winning journalist and author, longtime anchor of CNN's morning show, and throughout her 3 decades in journalism, Alisyn has covered stories around the world and earned 2 Emmy Awards. Her latest book is Combat Love, but I think the bigger late news on her is Substack under her name, Alisyn Camerota, which has just been killing it. I did an early sort of beta, and she's really launched it to great acclaim and audience. Congratulations, and hello, Alisyn.
Thank you very much, Harry. I would call yours a master beta.
Exactly. Jacob Weisberg, executive chair and co-founder of Pushkin Industries. He was previously CEO of the Slate Group, co-founder of Panoply, and editor-in-chief of Slate Magazine. He's the author of too many books to mention, but they are several, and he serves as chair of the all-important these days Committee to Protect Journalists. Jacob, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Harry. Glad to be back.
Okay. The last day has seen a tear in the fabric at DOJ rip fully open into a scandal that is still playing out. It was brought on by a command from the acting Deputy Attorney General to the acting U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York to drop charges against Mayor Eric Adams, and the U.S. Attorney resigned rather than do so, which has triggered cascading series of resignations until, we're told, all of the public integrity section of DOJ was locked in a room like truant school children or Stalinist bad citizens and demanded somebody's got to step up and agree to file the motion, which one finally did. I want to start with this because I'm steeped in DOJ culture. I'm a rule of law guy, but there's been frustration at all these issues that they don't sound easily in the public consciousness. This one sure seems to me like a scandal that has clear terms and is easy to understand. Am I, however, being distorted? Is this just going to be one of a few stories that will pass into the next quickly?
Well, I don't think that anything that the Eric Adams scandal is a household concern. I know you're talking about something bigger at DOJ, but I'm saying that Fox, for instance, will be able to easily boil it down to, so he took some first class flights. This is not a big deal. Eric Adams, they will be able to boil it down in a way that to their viewers and therefore all the Trump voters won't seem like it affects their life. They just won't see it in the gestalt that you're talking about of the DOJ and justice.
Yeah, Harry, I mean, I think it's not the outrageousness of the charges against Eric Adams, which I will say have always seemed a little marginal to me. You know, if you want to fly to Paris by way of Istanbul to go business class, more power to you. But what's scandalous is the suborning of justice and the way Trump is doing this. And it's not even his transactional dismissing of the charge in favor of benefits from Adams. He's holding this as a Damocles sword over Adams' head. He can blackmail Eric Adams for as long as Adams is in the mayor's office. He suspended the charges, but they can be reinstated. I don't think that's an accident. And both things can be right? It can be truly outrageous and criminal, but no one may care. And that's the situation we're in with so much of what's going on now, partly because our heads are spinning and we're discombobulated and nobody can keep up with the pace of outrage, which is Trump's peculiar innovation in politics. But we're going to come back to all of this. We will revisit all of these things down the road. But this week, it seems like about number 12 in terms of how upset you should be about it.
But Harry, what would you have done if you were at the DOJ?
Oh, I'd have resigned. Let me just push back a little, because you're right. To me, it's not about Adams. It's completely about an order to some very solid career professionals. I mean, the scorecard lineup is the best DOJ has to offer against what strike me as sort of Stalinist bullies now. But they gave a command that she really, in her letter back, gave a very strong case that you're telling me to violate my oath of office, to lie to the court. I cannot do that. And whether it's portrayed as this sort of crass political exchange with Adams, and speaking of Fox News, to me, I think I'm just too choir boyish, but it was stunning to see Adams kind of laughing on Fox News about, yes, I've made this deal with you. Whether it's that or simply, I, Donald Trump, want to dismiss it to serve my greater talking point about weaponization. When it comes to this, when the rubber hits the road at violate everything that is in your DNA and marrow about what the department does and when it brings charges and when it dismisses them, to me, especially given the way things have gone the last few years and the charges that it was the Biden folks that were weaponizing. To me, that's a pretty coherent storyline. And as you say, Jacob, part of what's been happening the last week is just the sheer pace of things, but also the governmental bureaucratic nature of things, DOGE and impoundment, etc. Whereas this seems so raw, and it's not going away because there'll be a hearing in the court. But I think I'm persuaded, or at least hear you, though it's a little discouraging, that maybe the outrage doesn't penetrate any kind of broader consciousness. In fact, some have even suggested, I don't buy this at all, I think they've blundered, but some have suggested that for Trump, it's all hunky-dory because it's resulted in a purge of these most important folks at DOJ, whom he regards as members of the deep state. And what could be bad there? All the more resignations, the merrier. And that, at least in the public eye, that's the way it will play, as if it's all purposeful.
I mean, my thought is, first of all, good for Danielle Sassoon,
Totally.
this young conservative prosecutor, and her colleagues. I've been thinking a lot about who shows courage in the face of tyranny, just to call it what it is. And I think it's pretty unpredictable, and it may not be the people we think of as the resistance or the opposition. The whole Cheney family has been heroic in their moral stance in opposition to Donald Trump. And weirdly enough, so is at the moment Mitch McConnell. He's the only Republican senator showing any resistance. We may not like the people who are standing up to Trump, and we may be surprised by them, but I think we should recognize what they're doing, which is, a kind of internal dissonance. And it's so much harder for a conservative or Republican, especially one in politics, to stand up to Trump than it is for a liberal or a Democrat. I mean, this is their whole world. These are their friends, and the kinds of threats they get in response to doing this, I think actually are far more extreme than what liberals and people on the left may get. So I think we have to look for allies where we find them, and I think we have to celebrate the kind of moral courage of those challenging Trump where we find them.
And I just want to say what Jacob said. I agree. You never know where the heroes will emerge. You can't spot them beforehand. I mean, that they, as history teaches us, at some point, somebody who you didn't know their name or whatever, they emerge and they change the equation, and we'll see what happens. But Jacob, about Mitch McConnell, do you think that he was able to vote against the Tulsi Gabbards of the world because he knew it wouldn't matter? In other words, he wouldn't have done it if he were going to be the third vote, not just one. Would he still have done it?
I don't know, and it's the right question in trying to analyze him. I think he's had enough. I wish he'd had enough when he could have impeached Trump after January 6th, and we wouldn't be where we are now. And probably he'd lose his sleep over that. But look, he's at the end of his career. He's not physically well. He's not running for office again. So in some sense, he has less to lose. But you still have a lot to lose. He's still as I said, the sea he swims in is a Trump sea. And, I think people don't like it. And let's say I'd like to believe that he's belatedly showing some spine. And I suspect he is.
He was the third vote in Hepseth, right? Who has come out of the box in fashion that people feared. And just to bring it back, so Danielle Sassoon, late 30s, Federalist Society, Scalia clerk, she's got a golden star on her for a judgeship, as does one of the others who was in her office, John Roberts' clerk. Stop and think about that for a second. Roberts has to know him, respect him, and be pretty appalled at what DOJ has done. John Roberts' clerk, 2 tours of duty, Bronze Star in Iraq. Also, it's really the sort of cast of characters here. And now I'll just report, because I think this detail would be lost on people, that then, at that point, Beauvais, the acting deputy attorney general, brings it to Main Justice, where he thinks they'll make short work of having the dismissal. The 3 top people at Public Integrity, the most vaunted section in probably in all of DOJ, all resign. And then the head of the whole criminal division, all acting people like Sassoon. They've just been put in recently by the Trump folks. These are not the holdovers. Also, he resigns, and then we have this morning, they were all summoned, some by phone, stuck in a room, said you got an hour or we're firing all of you. Somebody better step up and say they will file this motion to dismiss. They are really, really forced into it, and in a brute force way. And my final point here is it's not over. It won't just pass as of Friday, because there's a judge who has to say, under the rule that they're ordered to file under, that dismissal is in the interests of justice. And it's a pretty long stretch. I don't see us doing it to say, okay, no dismissal. This will continue to be aired out. And I think both the theme of one side is being brutes and knaves and politicians, and the other side are following their oaths, to me feels understandable. But I've been told, not just on this podcast, that I'm being a little bit, pointy-headed and overly sanguine, and maybe so. Let me just ask if you guys have any thoughts. How does it play out? It certainly isn't over yet as a matter of reporting, and it isn't over yet as a matter of legal process, and it maybe isn't over yet, Jacob, even if they get what they want, with the point you made. And now, as you say, if Adams doesn't play ball, they can reinstitute the charges. There's talk of the governor removing Adams. Do you see it as just kind of fading into the noise, or having legs?
I don't know. I mean, I think back to the Saturday Night Massacre,
Right.
which happened when I was a kid, which ultimately had a happy ending. You remember who the hero of it was, Harry?
Mm-hmm.
Elliot Richardson. That name mean anything to you? Man,
to me, yeah, it does. As does Ruckelshaus and Bork. Absolutely. Bork, who took the heat, being Bork, actually talked it through with Ruckelshaus and Richardson to say, we're going to be in free fall, and nope, they won't find anybody unless I step up and did. Whereas what happened with the department, they went into free fall. So in that way, it's sort of more dramatic.
Well, I'm not cynical about it. I think they are going to roll over the dissidents, but I don't think they will ultimately successfully roll over the dissidents. And New York has a lot of cards to play. I mean, if they were fighting this battle in Texas, I think it would play out very differently. But in New York, as you say, the governor is going to stand up to him. The governor, is systemically at odds with the mayor anyway in New York. That's always a battle. So, I can't see Eric Adams waltzing to re-election and recovering from this. I think he's now successfully in purgatory as opposed to in the dock as in a criminal case.
The predicate, of course, is it should set off every alarm to an even greater degree, a substantially greater degree than the Saturday Night Massacre. Because back then we did have some lanes in place to keep things from completely careening out of control. And we had a public that had already learned enough about Nixon that it was upset. Now, we have a very different media, something that, Harry, you and I talked about before with the great John Dean.
We talked about Saturday Night Massacre with John Dean. How cool is that? It's like a lawyer's fantasy. Sorry, go ahead, Norm.
You just have to pinch yourself. You're discussing this with John Dean. There were 3 networks, and there were really 3 main newspapers, the Post, the Times, and the Journal. There were a lot of other newspapers that mattered back then compared to where we are now. And everybody went to DEFCON 1. And for those who think that DEFCON 5 is the highest level, no, it's DEFCON 1. So something I continually try to educate people about. Although with Pete Hegseth, who knows? There won't be any DEFCON anymore. And now, we have the following set of issues. One, we have a completely different media landscape. And that media landscape, I would say, is more dominated by the non-mainstream, quote-unquote, media, the alternative media sources that the right dominates. 2, our mainstream media has no idea how to cope with this current reality. And here I would say that Steve Bannon was spot on in 2017. You do a fire hose of outrages day after day, and they don't know how to deal with them. And when you then add in what Jeff Bezos and Will Lewis have done to the Washington Post, what the owner of the LA Times has done. And with all of the good journalists leaving and publishers and editors really reluctant to put stuff where it would need to be to grab a public's attention, which is in the biggest type possible across the top of the front pages. And I will say this, Harry, among the newspapers I subscribe to, and I do a number of them as I do many podcasts because I want to support the people who need it. But one is my hometown paper of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. And I look at the electronic edition every day. And almost every day, one of the top headlines on the front page is taken right from the New York Times news service, which happens with a whole lot of other papers. And we know a lot of other media, they're still opinion leaders, and they look at how everybody at the top reacts to this stuff. And if they treat it as a yawn or as a story where maybe you do a little something at the bottom of the front page and then fill it out on page 7 or page 9, they don't treat it with great gravity. And I think what we also have, frankly, is a large share of the public who don't think any of this affects them. And there's just no understanding of what it means if you shred the safety net, if you shred the ability to react against an autocratic takeover of the country, that it'll mean something to them. We have a whole lot of people who really believe that government does nothing for them. And, I'll take us back in the hot tub time machine to the debate over the Affordable Care Act, where I will swear to you that dozens, if not 100 members of Congress told me that they had done the town meeting where somebody had stood up and said, "Don't you dare let government touch my Medicare." People don't know what government does for them. By the time they find out with exploding all of these programs and agencies, it may be too late. And so I'm more nervous today, despite the heroic efforts of these incredible U.S. attorneys and assistant U.S. attorneys and the Southern District standing up and the public integrity section so far holding up. I'm skeptical that we're going to get what we need out of this.
I take all these points and I seem to be in a pointy-headed corner thinking that this really will have purchase. I'll just say, though, on the Times question, look today, the top 3 stories. I mean, they're playing it big, but Jacob and Alisyn, among others, have pointed out we've got the structural problem that we already had of Fox News, where this morning you had Eric Adams joking about his quid pro quo, and the overall impermeability of the places where Trump voters get their news. So perhaps even if it's played big by legacy media, that the counter narrative of, oh, deep state, what's the problem there? Great, get rid of them, will take hold.
I've been thinking about how do you boil all this down? People say, I can't keep track of it. He's just attacking on all fronts. What do you say? It seems to me that the simplest synthesis is the president is using powers he doesn't have. It's not just the abuse of power, it's the arrogation of non-existent power. And who can check him in this abuse of power? Congress clearly won't. The courts, in certain respects, surely will, but not on a timetable that's commensurate with his arrogation of power. And the press, which is not, it doesn't have a constitutional role exactly in doing this, but plays obviously a crucial role in accountability, is weakened, is in a very weak position historically relative to any other time. And to me, that's what's so worrying, is that he's taking powers he doesn't have, and it's not clear who can stop him or when they can stop him.
Yes, I totally agree with everything that Norm and Jacob have said, and that the flood the zone process that Steve Bannon popularized, or at least talked about, is working. And it's because it is impossible. It is impossible for just regular people to keep track of what's happening at the DOJ and Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. and the cost of eggs and what tariffs are going to mean for their kitchen table. Like, it's too much.
It's now time to take a moment for our sidebar feature, which explains some of the issues and topics that are prominent in the news. Today's sidebar is about judicial philosophies, the different approaches to interpreting the law that guide judges' decision-making. And to explain this topic, we welcome Josh Joplin. Josh Joplin's a singer-songwriter and the frontman of the Josh Joplin Group, a longtime force in the indie and alternative music scenes. You may recognize the group from their performances along artists like Old 97s, A Fine Frenzy, Travis, and Matthew Sweet, all of whom, I have to say, occupy my own sweet spot in indie music. So here is Josh Joplin on Judicial Philosophies.
A judge's primary role is to interpret and apply the law to specific cases. This may sound straightforward, but it's often more complicated in practice. Judges are supposed to restrain their own opinions, desires, and prejudices in order to render a fair judgment. The facts or history of a case may be complex, and sometimes the law itself is ambiguous. To guide their decision-making, judges often rely on what we call judicial philosophies, basically different approaches to interpreting the law. Some of these philosophies are structured systems of thought like textualism, which looks closely at the literal words of a law. Others are more like patterns in a judge's thinking that become evident through their writing. These judicial philosophies tackle big questions like, should a judge advocate for social change? How strictly must they follow the text of a statute? And how much weight should they give to previous court rulings? Judges bring their own temperaments and ideologies to these questions, shaping their unique perspectives on the law. Take originalism, for example, a well-known philosophy championed by figures like Robert Bork and Antonin Scalia. According to originalism, laws should be interpreted as they were originally understood based on the intentions of those who wrote them. This philosophy is often linked to conservatism, as it resists applying contemporary context to older laws. Unsurprisingly, judicial philosophies can often be controversial. Critics argue originalism fails to adapt to changing historical situations. Originalists, on the other hand, argue that some liberal jurists overstep their judicial function and step into the legislator's role in the name of social justice. Regardless of where they fall, most judges develop or adopt judicial philosophies. Understanding these philosophies is critical to understanding Supreme Court decisions. For Talking Feds, I'm Josh Joplin.
Thank you, Josh. After an extended hiatus, the Josh Joplin Group is back with a new studio album, Gap Year, available on all platforms April 4th. All right, it is now time for a spirited debate brought to you by our sponsor, Total Wine and More. Each episode, you'll be hearing an expert talk about the pros and cons of a particular issue in the world of wine, spirit, and beverages.
Thank you, Harry. Today's spirited debate asks, to decant or not to decant? That is the question. And the short answer is yes. But when should you decant? First off, what is it? Decanting is the process of slowly pouring liquid, in this case wine, from one container to another without disturbing the sediment at the bottom. It is important to separate the wine from the sediment if there is a lot of it, because the sediment can dampen the aromas and flavors in your glass. Decanting wine also helps the wine to aerate, which is the process of introducing oxygen to the liquid. No doubt you've heard or even said the phrase, let the wine breathe. Well, that's what decanting does best, allowing those aromas to expand while making the wine more flavorful and balanced. And it's never a bad idea to decant a young, bold wine. In fact, at Total Wine & More, our guides recommend allowing an hour or two for the process to work best. This is not advisable for mature wines that just need to be separated from their sediment. Leaving a mature wine in a decanter for too long could cause flavors to become muted from too much aeration. Remember to taste your wine while decanting, to be sure it is not left aerating for too long. And don't forget, the younger and more closed the flavors are when you open the wine, the more it will benefit from the decanting process. Even a few seconds of aeration or a quick swirl in your glass will do wonders to your favorite wine from Total Wine & More. However, the best rule of thumb is, whenever you can, decant. Taste and enjoy when it feels best to you. It's personal. Cheers.
Thanks to our friends at Total Wine & More for today's A Spirited Debate. Why don't we move to an area where his raw political will seems to have prevailed? which is some of the confirmations of people who sure seemed in doubt at the start, but one after the other, we're down only to Kash Patel, have managed to skate through. Norm, let me start with you, because you've been very, I think, prescient and outraged about the Senate Republicans and the R's in Congress. Are they basically now, completely indolent, just not a constitutional factor and not the check that they're designed to be?
So a few bullet points. One, I am high on Mitch McConnell's enemies list, and I can share with you video of him attacking me on the Senate floor, at my former institution, AEI, and in other ways. If anybody had said that high on the dance card would be that the one Senate Republican standing up against these deplorable nominees was Mitch McConnell, we would have laughed that person out of the room. Second, I will get to the Senate Republicans, but first I have to do a mini rant on the Senate Democrats. They had the majority from November 5th until January 3rd. Where were the pre-confirmation hearings on these deplorables when they controlled the witness list, when they could have laid out a stronger case that at least would have created more of a headwind for some of these deplorable people? And where were the hearings on Schedule F and what we knew was going to be the attempt to hollow out the bureaucracy? How about hearings on what the impact of tariffs would be on people's lives? All of those things. And none of it was done. It's not like we have an opposition party that has shown itself up to the task, with exceptions. And some of them have been really good in these confirmation hearings, but hearings that have been stacked against them to begin with. Beyond that, this is a cult. Plain and simple, a cult. And I can tell you, just to pick one example, Bill Cassidy, who in other times would have been a commendable member of the Senate, thoughtful, problem-solving guy, physician, who said many times that he was so proud as a physician that he used vaccinations to be able to save the lives of thousands or more of the children in Louisiana, gave all of these reasons why Robert F. Kennedy Jr. should not be in a position of influence or power, and then caved. And why? Well, in a cult, you are fearful of being shunned or excommunicated. Your friends, your relatives, your colleagues will not speak to you or will treat you as a traitor. But I also know with a pretty high degree of certainty that he and his family got death threats. And it's the death threats and the implicit threats of violence that sometimes turn to explicit threats that are also cowing people. We know that Bill Cassidy is up for re-election. He already has a challenger from the right. We know that that's the case with some of these other Republican senators who've caved. That's not an adequate reason. And if it is, if you are voting for people who are going to endanger the lives of Americans, cost the lives of Americans, blow up our intelligence capabilities and open us up to terrorist attacks and to violence in other ways, and you don't do it because you might lose your seat, get out of the goddamn way and don't be in public office to begin with. So watching Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Bill Cassidy, Todd Young, among them, go through these dances, putting out their rationale for voting for Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., and we will see this with Kash Patel. Nauseated. It frankly nauseated me. And watching in the Senate Judiciary Committee as Dick Durbin shows evidence that Kash Patel lied directly to that committee under oath in his confirmation hearing, and none of them did anything other than vote him out to be picked as the director of the FBI, just tells you more than you need to know. Feckless is way too weak a word to talk about these people. Traitorous is a better one.
I mean, it's worse than that in a way, because when Cassidy knuckles under, people look to him and take him for cover. Same with Ernst, a sexual assault survivor, and she got totally a tough campaign back home. and a former DOD person. So everyone looked to her on Hepstead. It seems like in 3 or 4 instances, they have very effectively and kind of brutally targeted the one pivotal person who the rest of the Senate can say, well, if they did it, almost the role that Collins played on Kavanaugh. And that has been, on the one hand, brutal. On the other, that's been the effective use of political raw force.
Well, I was going to say, with respect to Norm, I think there's a little bit of a contradiction in what you're saying. You can't, being in a cult is the opposite of being a hostage. And we have to decide whether we think, if we're going to think about what these people, their behavior, are they in the cult or are they hostages? I think what you just said supplied a lot of evidence for the latter. People like Cassidy are physically afraid of threats and violence. They're intimidated in all sorts of ways. They're cowardly. They're afraid to stand up, but they don't believe. If you're in a cult, you believe. And there is a Trump cult. There are people who believe. But I think many, if not most, of the elected Republicans are not in that situation. That has big implications for life after Trump, because I don't think they're going to be looking for a new cult leader. I think it'll be like, well, depending on how he goes, like the fall of Saddam Hussein. It will turn out that nobody ever supported him. That's what we'll find out. And I don't think they should be allowed to get away with that. But I think we have to be attuned to what's actually going on there.
I was going to mention Patty Hearst.
Yes,
but
right. Yes, you can be a hostage and join the cult.
You can be a hostage and join the cult. The counter to that, Jacob, and I think you're right. I mean, there are 2 groups here. There are the actual cultists and there are the moral cowards and the physical cowards. It's true. And, if you're facing these threats, all right, Fred Upton and his wife Amy had credible death threats after he voted for the second impeachment because of January 6th, and he left. You stay and do that, you're a moral coward. The problem I think we have here is that the cultism has extended to the rank and file public, a sizable enough share of it, that even with Trump gone, many of these people are going to fear, going far enough away from those doctrines that I think we have a long time to go. And when I look at the farm team, the next generation, the people in party positions of influence in the states, in the state legislatures, in the city councils, and God help us, in the boards of education, they are completely inculcated into the cult. They have only grown up through all of this media barrage, propaganda barrage, and they make the Freedom Caucus, many of them, look mild by comparison. So it's going to take a long time to leach us out of this. They may reject Trump in the end, maybe, although my guess is that you'll have all kinds of people wanting to change the names of airports to the Trump airport and change the name of the Gulf to the Gulf of Trump from the Gulf of America, or maybe change the name of one of the Great Lakes, whatever it might be. But the cult can operate with a different leader. And I fear that the people who will want to succeed Trump are going to want to embrace Trumpism, even if he's gone.
I think you've both spelled out the 2 options, and I think it's unknowable. We don't know if J.D. Vance or Don Jr. could grab the reins in the way that Trump has. It's simply unknowable right now. But I will say, I'm always so confused by the people who completely give up their dignity and any moral fiber that they had to vote in a way that they know will put the country at bigger risk. The people who are voting for Tulsi Gabbard, the people who are voting for Pete Hegseth, the people who are voting for fill in the blank, because to keep their jobs. I understand if they're getting death threats and they're worried about their family, and we have to figure out a way to protect them, because that's, for real. But to protect your job, is being a congressman and a senator that great? That's what you're willing to surrender all of your convictions for? It's not, particularly a congressman, that's absurd to me. And I know you want to be in the cool crowd, whatever. People will call you a pariah. I just talked to Adam Kinzinger about it. Republican, conservative congressman who is a truth teller and had the spine to stand up during the impeachment and January 6th. And, he said, yeah, I still have some friends. I lost a lot of friends, but so be it. That's, politics ain't beanbag. That's life in the big leagues.
I was just going to say, I think it's actually an opportunity. Look, I got 2 words for them, Danielle Sassoon. And not to mention Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, even with the threats, they get to do the right thing. And I'll just say, Jacob, in terms of there will be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission at some point, we have to hope. And each of these people, Cassidy, basically I'll give a version of I looked into their soul and, I pressure tested Kennedy, says Cassidy, enough to know that he's going to rebuild trust in public health. Give me a fucking break. And Susan Collins on Patel, because when they are the pivotal figure, they have to stand up and be counted. We'll see. At the time it feels so hot and right on the epicenter of things. Maybe people forget it, but we should have such problems. But what is this going to all look like in the future?
I was going to say, if I wanted to defend these people, and I surely don't, I would say that they think these people are so incompetent, and the bureaucracies that they're taking over are so strong that essentially these nominees will bounce right off them. And I'm not sure that's wrong. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, I don't think the intelligence community is going to give her the time of day. I mean, I think they're very good at surviving bad leadership. I think the Pentagon's going to be pretty good at surviving bad leadership as an institution, not at the level of policy. I mean, Hegseth can surrender to Russia over Ukraine, but in terms of what goes on a day-to-day basis of the Department of Defense, it will continue. I'm much less sanguine about the health system and less sanguine about the Justice Department. I think they're simply more vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, the Justice Department, they have the problem, which is they tell the truth. But man, oh man, one thing you learn from these letters is the mindset that Beauvais brought to the job. They're all going to try to, we're going to get them. If you have a similar mindset at those other places, it does seem to me that like RFK Jr., is he really going to have the chops to do it? But I have to say both Bondi and Hegseth to date have been as bad as people worry about. All right, so let me just ask here, what we're painting is a fairly bleak picture in which, it just washes over. That by itself doesn't account for this disconcerting fact that Trump's numbers have never been higher. There seems to be a sense in which the people are not just accepting things, but like thumbs up. And that's notwithstanding, we learned again, we said again and again in the wake of the election, everyone was focused on the price of milk in the supermarket. Well, inflation's had a terrible month, and the tariffs, if you listen to anyone with any sense at all, it's going to be worse. How do you account for his riding relatively high after 3 weeks that, at least to us, look like a kind of, constitutional carpet bombing?
Well, most people are followers. People like a strong man.
Is that, yeah, so it's the strength you think that is like confusing him with FDR or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't think that it's forever. I think that people do like to see things getting done, even though so much of it is just a performance and complete theatrics. And he's signing. He doesn't even know what he's signing. He's like, and what is this one? And then, one of his Sherpas tells him, and he's like, has no idea what that just meant, and he's signing it. Trump's very good at the theatrics of the job of, playing the strong man and of looking like things are finally happening. And I think that people can be, swept up in the Oz-like features of that for a while.
Great word for that, yeah.
But not forever. I mean, not forever. And I particularly think that if people really voted on the economy, and I'm not sure they did, I mean, I think that misinformation played a huge factor in the election. But if they voted on the economy, then they're not going to be happy for long.
So I would add to that. One, we have one survey, which was a YouGov CBS survey that showed Trump at over 50%. A couple of days later, there was another YouGov survey that showed him down in the mid-40s. So I would say his approval has held steady, but it's still basically below 50%. And I think a lot of people who voted for him don't want to immediately turn around and say, "Oh, I was so stupid, I made a mistake." They're waiting. And let's note that we're heading for a showdown on March 14th of whether we get a government shutdown. One of the big debates going on within the ranks of Democrats in the House and Senate is whether they will give any votes to Republicans for what will be their reconciliation package, along with the basic move to probably do another continuing resolution to keep the government open. And I think they would be insane to give them anything. What they need to do is obviously get out there and make the point over and over and over again in every avenue that they can that the Republicans have the reins of power everywhere, and it's their policies, and let them enact them and let things go where they will. If we get a shutdown and we start to see disruption in people's lives pretty quickly, and some of the programs, the people who are leaving, the other things that are happening, it'll take a while for them to really bite people. The healthcare changes, I think in a little while we're already seeing these sort of very muted plaintive cries from House members and senators from Kansas and Missouri.
And citizens in like Alabama who can't pay their utilities bills, right?
But it's like, well, we've got all this food from our farmers that's sitting there waiting to go over with AID grants, and can't you at least do something about this? And Katie Britt in Alabama, quietly saying, and none of that is happening. And I think we're going to see some serious backlash before very long. What troubles me the most, and it gets to something we were talking about earlier, is we've got a group of Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and other violent insurrectionists pardoned who are going to be the new brown shirts, a vigilante army working for Trump. Call them the orange shirts. And there will be threats of violence, and there may even be some people beaten up. One of the changes that got no attention, Trump got rid of the head of the U.S. Marshals Service and replaced him with a Trumpist. Who protects the judges from violence or mayhem? Marshals. We're going to have some judges getting a little concerned about what happens here.
And what happens when judges issue orders and they have to be executed? It essentially goes to marshals. There are 18 different ways to think about this, and we're nearly out of time. I did want to take advantage, Jacob, of your concern and experience with the Committee to Protect Journalists. It does seem to me blocking reporters from Oval Office events, expelling journalists from Pentagon workspaces, targeting public media, all this, the FCC had saying they'll investigate. It seems like there's really the war, not just rhetorical, but actual war on media has been torqued up, especially on, media that doesn't kowtow. What's your feeling of the level of, alarm and crisis in the free press, especially given its importance now?
Alarm level high. I mean, we had a truly Orwellian moment this week where Trump, following up on his declaring that the Gulf of Mexico is the Gulf of America, barred the AP from covering politics, covering him, because it won't go along with his vocabulary. The AP, which, within an AP style book, sort of makes these decisions really on behalf of the whole press, had a very judicious examination of this where they actually agreed to call Denali Mount McKinley again because he has the legal power to do that under the Department of Interior. But he doesn't have the power to rename the Gulf of Mexico because it's not United States property. And as a result of that, the AP is accused by the White House press secretary of lying and being barred for lying. Now, you can't do that. It's a clear violation of the First Amendment. And I have little doubt that the courts will ultimately rule that the press cannot be barred from covering events because the president doesn't like their politics or anything else they say. Again, it's going to take a while to do that. Meanwhile, you have these lawsuits against news organizations. Only in authoritarian countries do we have heads of states filing lawsuits against news organizations.
And their personal names as well as harnessing the power of the government. That's right.
And Musk is meanwhile effectively putting a target on the back of individual reporters whose reporting he doesn't like because they've done the job of the press, which is to expose what his non-agency is doing. It's really severe, and the press is vulnerable. And so many news organizations, as I think Norm talked about briefly earlier, are in various ways capitulating. They're not all capitulating. The AP is not capitulating. The New York Times is not capitulating. The Washington Post has had some very bad moments, but I don't think they're capitulating. I don't think the Wall Street Journal is. But it is very important that the press stand together, but it's very vulnerable because It is suffering from a technology transition, from economic weakness, from all sorts of vulnerability on top of the political attacks. And that's what I think makes it so frightening.
Yeah, it's awful.
I'll just add that we've learned of a new tactic that we wouldn't have thought, which is we thought there would be insulation among the owners of the press who are very rich. But it turns out if they have other holdings like Bezos, like the LA Times, and even like Disney or Paramount, Trump is unafraid to push on those buttons. And to date, I think the press's response has been not so great.
Ironically, if you have $1 billion, it's fuck you money. But if you have $100 billion, it's you're fucked.
There you go. All right. We are just about out of time.
But that's why I'm going to stop at $1 billion. I will not go over $1 billion, I promise.
We only have a minute for our Talking 5, our question today. We have a new chair at the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. The President of the United States, Donald Trump. What will the center's next performance be?
Well, Harry, that's easy. It's The Village People, Scared Straight.
Alisyn, were you actually upset that was that yours? Did Jacob steal it from you?
I was going to say The Village People, but I didn't think of the clever Scared Straight. Only Donald Trump can turn the Village People straight. I mean, that is what's happened.
I'll tell you, people say, do you want to write a book? And it just makes me weep to think about it. But there's a book to be written on just the song YMCA and how it went from 63rd Street Y bathhouse to whatever. Anyway, Alisyn Camerota.
Oh, well, I mean, you mean I need a new one now? Not just the Village People? Oh, okay. Village People, what he said, or Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Kid Rock, musical director.
I'm going with Springtime for Hitler starring Elon. Thank you so much, Alisyn, Norm, and Jacob. And thank you very much, listeners, for tuning in to Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts. And please take a moment to rate and review this podcast. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we are posting full episodes, talking books, and bonus video content. Check us out on Substack at Talking Fed Substack, where I'll be posting 2 or 3 bulletins a week, breaking down the various threats out there to constitutional norms and the rule of law. You can follow us on Twitter at Talking Feds Pod, and you can look to see our latest offerings on Patreon. Talking Feds remains a completely independent production, so if you like the work we do and are inclined to support the show, joining our Patreon is the best way to do it. And Talking Feds has joined forces with The Contrarian. I am a founding contributor to the bold new media venture committed to reviving the diversity of opinion that feels increasingly rare in today's news landscape. Rest assured, it's still the same scrappy independent podcast you've come to know and trust, just now linked up with an ambitious and vital project designed for this pivotal moment in our nation's legal and political discourse. Find out more at contrarian.substack.com. Thanks for tuning in. And don't worry, as long as you need answers, the Feds will keep talking. Talking Feds is produced by Catherine Devine. Our associate producer is Becca Havian. Sound engineering by Matt McArdle. Rosie Don Griffin, David Lieberman, Hamza Mahendranathan, Emma Maynard, and Hallie Necker are our contributing writers. Production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu and Sebastian Navarro. Thanks to Josh Joplin for the sidebar discussing judicial philosophies. Our music, as ever, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.